give it so much thought on what it's really about. What is marriage? What's this a symbol of? All right. And with that thought in mind, well, we don't have time to get into that, but with that thought in mind, people need to realize that it's a symbol of the relationship between Christ and the church, between your personal relationship between you and Christ. And if you have that thought in mind, you can and think about this title, Questions in Marriage, you probably can come up with some answers that you didn't realize you knew. And as I said, the lesson this morning deals with a letter that the Corinthians, some of the Corinthians had written to Paul about some questions that they had. And this was one of the questions that they had. And look with me, if you will, to the introduction. It says, among the Corinthians, there were two views of sex and marriage. Jumps right into it. One view was advocated by the ascetics, who insisted that no place should be given to marriage and sex. Now, who's Paul writing to here? Keyword church. By that, I want you to think that as highly as the church should be held in esteem, there are still problems within that need to be dealt with, and this was one of them, because it caused a problem in this church. What is an ascetic? Anybody got an idea? An ascetic is a person who practices self-discipline with a view towards spiritual improvement. We all want spiritual improvement, right? But sometimes spiritual improvement, well, all the time, spiritual improvement cannot be attained by intellectual assent. You can't just think and, think something to be better off. The Greeks were big on knowledge. And so they tried to think their way through a lot of things. But practice towards self-discipline with a view towards spiritual improvement, especially by learning to do without things that's good in themselves, good in itself. So Paul says here that Brother Arrington says there's two views of this. One held by the ascetics, who insisted that there was no place should be given to marriage and sex. Anything that had to do with the desires of the body was thought to be evil and must be suppressed. The other view was embraced by the libertines, who believed it was not important that they did what they did with their bodies, and gave full range to their natural appetites by visiting houses of ill repute. Which one do you think applies to our world today? The libertines or the ascetics? Yeah. You remember the 60s? What was it all about? That decade. Huh? Free love, yeah. A whole decade was taken up by that. But Paul here is, like I said, he's confronted with this question that these people ask him, and so he's obligated to answer it. And as I said, okay, we got it. Now concerning the things whereof you wrote me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. What do you see when you read that? What do you think on that? Nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. Now, concerning things, back it up. Now, concerning the things whereof you wrote unto me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. What's he mean? What's he saying? Okay, but this, if you will, look at it as if Paul is using a quote from the letter they wrote him in way of introduction. He says, now concerning the things whereof you wrote unto me, the question was, or your statement was, it's good for a man not to touch a woman. The view of the ascetics there. They thought there was no place for it, so they didn't want to practice it. But he said, nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. Why do you think he said that? Everybody agree with that? Do you ever give consideration to the thought of how strong a desire passion is? Put it more blunt, how strong the sexual drive is? That's what. It's a natural thing, right? But Paul says, nevertheless, to avoid fornication. In other words, Paul realizes and knew that that temptation is within man's bounds. That is, every man has that desire. Every woman has that desire. Y'all looking at me like, where in the world? This is going to be, I told you this is going to be a lesson to hold on. But Paul realizes this. And he realizes also that because the people wrote him about it, they have questions. They need answers. You ever have a question you needed an answer to? And you know, I don't know of any answer or any question that you could really ask that you couldn't find the answer to in God's Word. And this kind of I think, points that out this morning. But Paul says, nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife and every wife have her own husband. Plain and simple. Paul said, if you're not married and you cannot control yourself, key word control, if you cannot control yourself, it's better for you to marry than to burn. Because like I said, he had these two different views that he was dealing with, the aesthetic view and the libertine view. And Paul was answering their question. Each woman wants to have her own husband and each man his own wife. Marriage is wise. Among other things, it is a protection against fornication. Men and women have sexual desires which are proper. Did he say that? Which is proper. The unmarried ran the risk of being tempted to sexual impurity. Normal sexual desire can find their proper fulfillment in the marriage relationship. You agree with that? Each one of us should say, yes, we agree with that, because that's doctrine, and that's biblical teaching. We need to practice that. Any questions or comments? Right. Right. All right. Tony? Right. 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 That's true. Never mind. Any other comments? But I like it when you look at that first verse. If you're not thinking that Paul is repeating the statement that they made in the letter, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. You'll get a mixed, not a mix, but a misinterpretation of what Paul was saying there. Because when you read it just off the surface, you think, my goodness, no wonder they was having a question about it. But keep in mind that what he said there, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. He is quoting from the letter that they had written to him. And when you look at it that way, it sheds a whole new light on what he's talking about, especially in light of verse 2, where he qualifies it by saying, nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and every wife have her own husband. Any further comments? All right, give me the next one. Let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence, and likewise also the wife unto her husband. The wife hath not power over her own body, but the husband. And likewise also the husband hath not power of his own body, but the wife. For I would that all men were even as I myself, but every man hath his proper gift of God, one after this manner, and another after that. What in the world is he talking about here? Anybody? Okay. All right. All right. Anybody else got a view? Point? Let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence, and likewise also the wife unto the husband. Hello? Come on now. What are we talking about here? Right. You owe it to each other to meet each other's needs, not just, I'll say it, in the bedroom, but where else? Now, that's what Paul's talking about here. The physical side of marriage. Keep that in mind. But he says, render unto the wife due benevolence, and likewise also the husband, or the wife due benevolence. Because one has not power over their own body. What do you mean by that? Right. This is one of those questions that you needed to consider prior to marriage. That, hey, I'm taking on a responsibility to this other person, and vice versa. And Brother Lee, you want to take over here? But, huh? Go ahead, Chris. Right. Uh-huh. Right. 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 Okay, look at verse 3 again. Let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence, and likewise also the wife unto the husband. The wife hath not power over her own body, but the husband. And likewise also the husband hath not power over his own body, but the wife. Paul's saying the same thing there in that second verse, or the fourth verse, just reversing the roles. But which group of people do you think Paul was writing to, or was the question was answering? The libertines or the ascetics? No, the ascetics, because they're the ones that held the view that sex was bad and there was no place for it in marriage and so forth, etc. Paul's saying that's not what it's all about. What it is about is you're under you use the word covenant. You're under a covenant to that person, and so you have not power over your own body. You got to consider the needs of that other person, whether it's your wife or whether it's your husband. And boy, you could take off on that right there, and you could hold a whole class on a different class on that particular subject. But he said, the wife hath not power over her own body, but the husband, and likewise also the husband over. For I would that all men were even as I myself. What's that for, Alicia? Gave me a look there like, but what do you mean by that? Responsibilities. Right. You're getting way ahead of us here, bro. But that's all right. You're on the right track. But he said, I would that all men were even as I myself. Now, there's, when you think of that, well, during this time, it's evident that Paul was more or less, not more or less, but more likely to be, dadgummit, not married at this particular time. And there's different views as to whether or not he married later on or he stayed celibate the rest of his life. But Paul was not married at that time. And he said, I would that all men were like myself. And he'll qualify that a little later on down through the lesson here. But I would that all men were even as I myself. But let every man hath his proper gift of God, one after this matter and another after that. What do you think he meant by that? Right. Right. But every man hath his proper gift of God, one after this manner, and another after that. Do you think all men / women are the same? Huh? Do you think all men and all women are the same? No. No. What I'm saying is, uh, you know, made it a question, but I'm saying that not every man has the same level of desires as another man. The same with a woman. And we all don't have the same levels of desire. Paul's saying here, let a man have his own proper gift. We each have within us different levels of passion, if you want to put it that way. Some are more able to control themselves than others. Some are able to live a celibate life. Others aren't. When God made man, what did he say after he made Adam? What'd you say, Jim? Right. He said it's not good that man should dwell alone. So, when you take that at face value, what's that say to you? Okay. All right. So every man has that desire. Well, not every man either. But men has that desire God has put within us, instilled within each and every one of us, that desire for a mate, if you will. Now, Paul saying here, but every man hath his proper gift of God, one after this manner and another after that manner. Not everybody has the same level of desire, not the same level of passion. Some men cry, some men don't. Some think it's beneath them to cry, or to show any emotion in any way, shape, or form. I never, in all my life, never, ever, ever remember my father shedding a tear for anything. But me, I could cry at the drop of a hat. Sometimes I look at my grandkids, and it just brings me to tears. Things they do, things they say, the way they walk, the way they do this, the way they do that, and it's just everybody's different, and that's what Paul's talking about here. Every man has his own level. A sin? Land, no. No, really? Huh. But no, I don't personally think it's a sin to take birth control. I'm not. Our author here says that among the Corinthian believers were those who were convinced that marriage should not or should only involve spiritual but not physical love. When a partner in marriage attempts to spiritualize the relationship, the other person is robbed or defrauded of her or his rights. The biblical view is that spiritual and physical cannot be separated. For even a spiritual word or scriptural word for sexual intercourse, yada, means to know. The most satisfying marriages are those characterized by affection and faithfulness, in which each partner seeks the physical satisfaction of the other. Under these conditions, the husband will never see his wife merely as a means of self gratification, but his focus will be on the whole relationship, the spiritual and the physical, which assures them of the fulfillment of their desires. So it's there's more to it than just what meets the eye, so to speak. Any questions or comments? Uh, exactly. And that's what Paul is trying to get these people to see and trying to get them to avoid, is falling into that trap. Any other comments? All right, let's move on. I say therefore to the unmarried widows. Paul kind of shifts gears here and goes from the marriage to the widows. To the unmarried widows, it is good for them that they abide even as I. But if they cannot contain, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn. Stop right there and let's digest this one. What's he saying here? But he's talking about widows now. Okay. I say therefore unto the unmarried widows, it is good for them to abide even as I. Why would he say that to an unmarried widow? Does every widow want to remarry? Okay. What's he saying? But I say, therefore, unto the unmarried widows, it is good for them to be, for them that they abide even as I. Just like he said in the previous verse where he said that they would be as, even as I am. The unmarried widow, like I said, you got to keep in mind what the whole reason Paul's addressing this situation. But the unmarried widow, he's saying, even as I am, it is good for that they abide even as I am. But if they cannot, let them marry. Now, he's saying that it wasn't against Scripture in any way, shape, or form for a widow woman to be married. But what happens when a lady becomes a widow or a widower? What happens to the wedding vow? Right. Exactly. She's no longer bound under that covenant, nor he, if he, in the case of a widow. So Paul's saying it's all right for them if they do marry, but he's saying it's better off for them if they don't. Why would he say that? Can you, in your mind, can you rationalize that? Can you accept that? Can you figure out why Paul would say that? Anybody else? The reason he says it, and I think he touches on it later on here, is because that once that marriage, they're no longer under that marriage covenant. They are fully free to focus on what? Serving God. Not so much, because if you go back to the previous verse, what Paul say? You don't have power over your own body. Right? You got to consider the wants and the needs of your spouse. But now that that spouse is removed, I don't have to worry about it. I can fully concentrate all my time on being, as Paul said, being single, and concentrate all my time on my relationship with God. And what's Paul say? That is the most important thing. With the circumcision don't mean a hill of beans, nor uncircumcision, or anything else. What really matters when you get down to the nitty-gritty is what? Your relationship with God. If you can cultivate that within the bonds of marriage and do well with it, and Paul touches on that step a little bit later too, all well and good, but he said if you can, then once you're out of that marriage covenant, it gives you a prime opportunity to really focus on your relationship with God. So we can look at that as saying, okay, if I'm a widow or a widower, then I have a prime responsibility, or I won't say responsibility, a prime opportunity to what? Better spiritualize myself and my relationship with God, to come closer to God. And Paul says, after all, that's what it's all about. And if they cannot contain, he says, if they still have that desire to have a mate, he said it's better for them to marry than to burn. Burn what? Huh? Yes, to burn in passion, to have that desire so strong within you that it leads you to do things you know is wrong. Exactly. So what? What'd you say? Well, ultimately, Brother Lee said, ultimately that's where you wind up. But that, I'm glad you mentioned that, Sister Evelyn, because if you look at it like that, for a long time, when I first read it, that's what I thought. To burn in hell. But what he's talking about is to have that burning, passionate desire in you that, it's like, well, like I said before, some can control it, some can't. And so if you're one of those that can't, and it's like a raging fire within you. Right. Yeah, that applies. That applies. But it all centers on that burning desire that you have within you to when you look upon somebody, as a guy look upon a pretty woman or just a woman and think, I gotta have it, gotta have her. And I can't speak for women, who can, but another woman. But it's like, well, I won't even go there. Never mind.
I think that might be one of the worst political comments. All my grandchildren in my life. Because it's been things that express that in my life.
Good point.
Because I have something to do. I have something to put my time in.
I see where you're going. Yeah.
My grandchildren.
Right. Yeah.
You won't be running for the tire trying to pick on mine.
You're right. That's a good point.
I think as far as the widow, it's important what your age is. Now, if I was to become a widow, I was very, when I was a widow, I was only 43. So I was ready, I had to get married, so I was ready to have another.
Right.
Now, we've been married 20 years, so that would have been 20 years that I would have been by myself if I had to do that.
Right.
We've had been married forever. I wouldn't now, my age, I'd never. And it wasn't because I don't have a good marriage, it's just I would spend my time between my children.
I don't think I would ever get married again if I didn't do.
Huh?
I wouldn't get married again if I didn't. I'm 74.
Should there be an age limit on it? I mean, it's personal preference, but should there be an age limit on getting remarried if you're a widow? Like Paul said, it all depends on the person. Right? Right. All right. Any other comments? But better to marry than to burn, and unto the married I command, yet not I. Uh, but the Lord, let not the wife depart from her husband, but and if she depart, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband, and let not the husband put away his wife. I lost myself here. I don't know where I'm at. Okay. He said, but if she cannot contain, then let her remarry, for it's better to marry than to burn. And unto the married I command, yet not I, but the Lord. Why do you think Paul would say that? All right, as Paul's just saying, it's not something that I'm saying here, and this will come out a little bit later on where he reverses the formula here. Let not the wife depart from her husband, but if she depart, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband, and let not the husband put away his wife. What's Paul talking about here? Huh? Divorce. Okay. On what? I start saying on what grounds, but in light of the way the lesson is reading here, in light of what the lesson says, Paul's talking about those that think that physical love inside the marriage is wrong. Paul said that's not a reason, that's not an excuse to put away your wife or your husband. He says, if they do, then look what he says. And if she depart, or you can insert he there, depart, let her or him remain unmarried or be reconciled unto her husband. And let not the husband put away the wife. Now, wait a minute. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Uh-huh. Yes. Uh-huh. Right. Right. Circumstances have a lot to deal with situations. With that thought in mind, let me just borrow from the author here. Next, the apostle turns those who were married but felt they did not need it. They are charged not to separate from their spouse. This charge to the married is not given on the basis Paul's authority, but on the Lord's. Should separation occur, the woman was to advise to remain unmarried or to restore her previous relationship. There is no parallel advice given to the husband, but the implication may be that they should remain unmarried or restore to his wife. Paul makes no attempt to deal with marriage, on non-Christians. Now, the subject of divorce and remarriage is one that's plagued the church for years and always will, I think, until God comes. But the situation, if you're the how should I put this? Offended? If you're not the guilty party in an adulterous situation, yeah, that's my interpretation. Right. And it has a lot, I think, take this with a grain of salt, if you will, or however you want to look at it, but it has a lot to do too, whether or not, I think, whether or not you were a Christian when everything happened, or whether you were in a state of still in a sinful state. But and that's another lesson in itself. So I'm not trying to skirt the issue, but we need to move on because we're losing time. But it is an issue that does need to be dealt with in the church today. Always has been, always will. But in this situation, not much. Help. Now say that again. So she kicked him out? I don't know. Huh? What'd you say? Uh, I'd say that's some kind of woman that she ran the man off. Little Melvin Milk Toast, I'm running home to go. What? Well, you didn't give no names, Beulah. You didn't need to give no names. But if think about it. If you were the mama and your daughter-in-law brings your son back to you, and here he is, he's yours, not mine. That's in my head to spinning. I tell you, I don't know how. Oh yeah. Right. Uh-huh. I tell you, yeah. Yeah. This world is messed up. All right, let's move on. Verse 12. But to the rest speak I, not the Lord. If any brother hath a wife that believeth not, and she is pleased to dwell with him, let him not put her away. Back up a minute. But the rest speak I, not the Lord. What's Paul talking about? What's he saying? All right, stop right there. What'd you say in the first? His opinion. Now, the rest speak I, not the Lord. Paul is giving his opinion, but what? What about that opinion? Wait, one at a time. What'd you say, Chris? Okay, okay. What'd you say, Brother Lee? Okay, that's the word I was looking for. Paul is speaking his own opinion, but under the authority and inspiration of the Holy Spirit. So it carries as much weight, if you will. I use that lightly, but it carries as much weight. To speak, I, not the Lord. But if any man hath a wife that believeth not, and she be pleased to dwell with him, let him not put her away. What's he saying here? You started, Chris, go ahead. What about the part where he says, if she be pleased to dwell with him? Okay. Paul's saying here that, let me give you a scenario. A couple get married, one gets saved and the other don't. Now, later on, he'll pick up, he'll reverse the role here of the woman which have a husband that believeth not, blah, blah, blah. If one gets saved and the other don't, Paul says, and if that other person, the other half of that equation, wants to stay in that marriage, he said, let not that Christian put her away. You understand where I'm going with this? You understand what he said? Why? He says to be not unequally yoked together. Okay. Paul is saying that, if that unbeliever is comfortable in living in that condition and living with that person, loves them enough and cares for them enough, that Paul is saying, don't let him put her away. Don't divorce, because your marriage vows, what are that? They're vows. They are covenant, if you will, with that person between you and God as to the relationship. So Paul's saying, let them stay together, whether the man be the saved or the woman be the saved. He says, for the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. Else were your children unclean, but now are they holy. So you see, when you undertake a marriage, it's a big step in life because you're responsible not only for yourself, but the spouse that you're with, as well as any children that may come into that relationship. And that's what Paul's talking about. The entire family is brought under the sanctifying influence of the gospel. There are spiritual benefits that unbelievers derive through their fellowship with believers. Christianity can be a source of blessings, excuse me, in the home and should be the dominating influence in the family, even where only one parent is a Christian. The faith of one parent affects the entire household. That is awesome. The effect of one parent. You never know who you're going to affect, who you're going to touch. All right, let's move on. But if the unbelieving depart, let him depart. A brother or sister is not under bondage in such cases. How many theological bubbles that burst? But if the unbelieving depart, let him depart. A brother or a sister is not under bondage in such cases. But God hath called us to peace. What knowest thou, O wife, whether thou shalt save thy husband? Thou, O man, whether thou shalt save thy wife? What's Paul saying? A brother or sister is not under bondage in such cases, but God hath called us to peace. Right. Because, and Paul follows it up with I forget the word I want here, but he said, but God hath called us to peace. In other words, God's called us to peace, not to stay and fight, and as Chris said, in a never-ending situation. I know of an individual who that very thing had happened. He was playing in of all things, a band one time. God spoke to him, said, you ought to be preaching to these people instead of singing to them. And he said, if you don't preach my gospel, another later on, he said, if you don't preach my gospel, you'll be consumed by worms. A little bit later on in life, he got a hold of something that didn't agree with him, and he had trichinosis. But the wife, when he said, I'm going to quit this, and said, I'm going to go preaching, I got saved, you're going to preach the gospel. The wife said, if you do that, you'll do it without me. She left. You know, that's a prime situation of this. She didn't want to stay, so she left. Any questions or comments? We're hurrying here because we're in the last few minutes. Still got several to go. Now concerning virgins, I have no command of the Lord, yet I give my judgment as one who hath obtained the mercy of the Lord to be faithful. I suppose therefore that it is good for the present distress. I say that it is good for a man to so be. What's Paul talking about here? Okay, but he says, now concerning virgins, I have no commandment of the Lord, yet I give my judgment as one who obtained mercy of the Lord to be faithful. In other words, Paul is qualifying what he's saying here on the fact that God has judged him to be a mercy, or to be faithful, and therefore he has the authority to give his opinion on this subject. I suppose that there is a good for a person, for the present distress, I say, that it is good for a man to be so. What's he talking about in that latter portion? The present distress. It goes back to the time in which, and this is one of those areas in Scripture where it applies specifically to the era that of when the writing occurred. Paul's writing to the Corinthians during a specific time, and a lot of persecution was going on, and a lot of distress was in the country, and things of that nature, and it was making it hard on families. So Paul's saying, hey, you know, under the present distress, under the present persecution and everything else, it's better if you remain unmarried. Why? Because you don't have to worry about family and everything else. So it's, in that instance, it's good for a man to be so. Any questions or comments? Like I said, we're rushing through here, so bear with me. And they that weep as though they weep not, and they that rejoice as though they rejoice not, and they that buy as though they possess not, and they that use this world as not abusing it, for the fashion of this world passeth away. But I would have you without carefulness. He that is unmarried careth for the things that belongeth to the Lord, how he may please him. But he that is married careth for the things that are of the world, how that he may please his wife. There is a difference also between a wife and a virgin. The unmarried woman careth for the things of the Lord, that she may be holy both in body and spirit. But she that is married careth for the things of the world, how she may please her husband. And this I speak for your own profit, not that I may cast a snare upon you, but for that which is comely, and that ye may attend upon the Lord without distraction. What's he saying? Real quick, anybody? That's what he's saying, yes. But he's saying don't get wrapped up in the things of the world. Concentrate on your relationship with God, because that's what matters. He said, they that weep as though they weep not, they that cry rejoice as though they rejoice not. Use the world's good, not as not abusing it, for the fashion of this world passeth away. Material things are going to pass away. But he said, your relationship with the Lord is what matters. But he that is married careth for the things that are of the world, now how he may please his wife. It goes back to what we said before about the obligation that one has. All right, the last one here we're going to look at. So then he that giveth her in marriage doeth well, but he that giveth her not in marriage doeth better. The wife is bound by the law as long as her husband liveth. But if her husband is dead, she is at liberty to be married to whom she will, only in the Lord. She is happier if she so abide after my judgment. And I think also that I have the Spirit of God. Paul, in the last portion there, is given his authority by saying that because I have the Spirit of the Lord, I feel that what I'm telling you is of the Lord, even though it may just sound like it's my opinion. He says, but she is happy. The wife is bound by the law as long as her husband liveth. But if her husband is dead, she is at liberty to be married to whom she will, only in the Lord. What do you mean by that? Only in the Lord. Right.